eXtreme makes some of the most popular aftermarket components for the Nintendo Switch Pro Controller, and with that, I'd like to talk about just what I've done to my two Switch Pro controllers and if these parts from eXtreme are worth getting or not. And with that, let's get into it. An easy place to start whenever we're talking about these Pro Controller parts is, well, the biggest part they have right now, and that is the Pro Controller shell. eXtreme makes a pretty good shell, and I've used two of them at this point, and they're both soft touch in particular. I can't really comment on their non-soft touch shells as I've never used them, but for the soft touch shells that I have used, I have a couple good things that I like about it and one slightly annoying thing, but otherwise pretty nice. And so, just to begin with, the soft touch shells are easy to install. It's literally the exact same thing as a normal shell, and they all come with extra screws, as does everything that they sell. Even if you buy joysticks that we'll talk about later, they come with extra screws, so if you end up buying multiple components, you'll end up with a shit ton of screws by the time you're done, which is nice, but is also kind of annoying. But back to the shell itself. The build quality is pretty nice, but just so you know, like most of eXtreme's parts, they're painted. And depending on what color you go with, it may become an issue. As really there's no rub off that occurs, as in rubbing the paint off of the shell itself. I've never seen a problem, but I've seen you can rub the paint off of other components onto the shell and then you can't get it off because you would strip the paint from the shell itself. So that's one of the big considerations. And then one of the other things that's kind of annoying is the seams. The seams that the Pro Controller has from the factory really aren't noticeable. There's a little bit of a gap, but it's very, very little. But whenever you install a Pro Controller shell on there, the seam is much more noticeable. I don't quite know why that's that way. If you put the controller together, just the shell part, it looks like it wouldn't have a seam. But whenever you install it onto the controller, it has a much more noticeable seam. Now, whenever you use a controller, it's no big issue. Your hands don't really rest on any of the seams, nor is the seam big enough to cause any issues with like pinching or anything like that. So it's a purely aesthetic issue if you'd be bothered by that sort of things, but with my usage, I really don't mind it. And I've used the white controller for about 2 years now, and I just built the green controller and I've used it for about 2 weeks now. And with that, I think we can move on to our next portion. We can cover this next one, the joysticks, very quickly. As in, they look almost exactly like the Switch's factory joysticks, and the colors are great. I'm very happy with the color match between the mint on the green controller that I have and the mint on the top of the replacement joystick that I used. And they couldn't be easier to install. You literally just pull up on the old one and push the other one down. You just have to line them up in a fashion that slides onto it. And it's really no big issue. It feels just like one. And the only issue that I've seen so far is not in my own usage, but in an Amazon review on eXtreme's website on Amazon. They sometimes will degrade over time and look darker colored. So I would recommend maybe make sure your hands are clean if you're using it, and maybe expect some darkening over time from the whatever's on your finger, I guess. I haven't personally noticed it, but like I said, I've only used this controller for about 2 weeks now, and I don't play my Switch really constantly. I use my computer for most games. So I actually am not super hard on components, so my usage may be a little different than someone that plays their Switch every day for multiple hours a day. I saved this last category for a reason. These, I think, are the worst of eXtreme's parts, and I think it's because, like I said with the shell earlier, they're painted, and these are the buttons. The buttons just, they have issues all around with them, and while they look great on this controller, you end up with some really annoying issues. And so, just to talk about, first, they have weird tolerance issues. Whenever you read the reviews of the buttons, they have similar issues with, they just don't feel the same as an original controller. Both in the plastic that they use, the plastic feels cheaper noticeably on the buttons, and they end up with issues regarding just how they fit into the shell. as the shell has little channels that the buttons have, like, it's almost like a key. They fit in a certain way, so you can't put the B button where the A button goes, something like that. And something along the lines there gets messed up, and sometimes buttons can stick. Now, it seems to be something with people using the controller for a long time before that even occurs, as I don't think in any of the reviews that I saw someone had it to begin with, unless there was a noticeable failure of the part. And I've noticed it. They feel different, like much different than the original buttons, and it gets much worse whenever you use the D-pad, as just looking at the D-pad makes it really obvious. The original Pro controller doesn't have a good D-pad to begin with. If you've used a D-pad on there for any point in time, it's pretty rough. Try and play Tetris 99 with it and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. You get random button presses every once in a while that are really annoying. So if you look at the original controller, there's a little bit of a gap. Shakes a little. Not crazy, a little bit. And this controller, there's a lot. And it's noticeable. It's an issue. In terms of accuracy, I'd say they're actually exactly the same in terms of accuracy. I haven't had an issue more than what I had an issue on the original D-pad with incorrect button presses, but it feels noticeably mushier and it overall isn't as good. This is where I tell you to stay away from if you use the controller a lot, especially for D-pad usage. The controller just doesn't feel as good with these, the D-pad in particular. The buttons I can get over, they really don't bother me. And that's what kind of sucks about the D-pad in particular on extreme rate controllers. And it's just, I don't understand if this is something fixable or not, because whenever you look at just what I spent on this controller, it was around $45 overall in parts, excluding tax and shipping and whatnot else. About $45 I had in. And while it looks great compared to just the normal Switch Pro controller, if you can get away with it, if there's a controller from Nintendo that's coming out at the time that looks relatively interesting to you, I would recommend you do that over trying to customize one yourself. Because overall, the feelings and build quality of the controllers just are not as good as Switch. And I just want to scroll a couple reviews maybe of the Amazon listings here and show there's some issues. It's not just me that has these issues, and I definitely have not experienced the worst issues with these controllers. And while they're good, it could be a lot better. And so if you're looking to do this, I'd recommend the joysticks are pretty good, but they can cause some discoloration issues later on, possibly. The shell is great. That's the one thing I tell without a doubt. If you know how to open a controller up and put one back together, is the best thing you can do. And the buttons, if you're gonna have an issue with cheaper feeling buttons, or if you don't like how the D-pad is already on the Switch Pro controller, then stay away from those. That's the biggest issue that they have right now, is they have to fix these buttons. Thanks for watching. Let me know in the comments below if you've used any extreme rate parts yet, or if you've done anything of the more interesting stuff that I haven't done so far, like the light up buttons and joysticks. They look really weird, but I want to know just if people like them or not. And with that, like I said, thanks for watching. Consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And with that, have a good day.